Este es un contenido de Uninorte Académico. Suscríbete, aprende y comparte.
Yeah. Hello. Good morning. I see so many happy faces today. It looks like yesterday was an interesting day for you. Okay. So let's start, please. Today we have 2 more sessions, and then you're going to be free to do whatever you want to do. So we're going to start with session number 5, which is about pandemic preparation and recovery. The co-chairs of this session are Monica Berger, okay, and Pablo Tsukayama. Monica, she's head of unit of medical anthropology at Universidad del Valle de Guatemala. She is a sociocultural anthropologist with a PhD in sciences from ETH Zurich. She heads the unit of medical anthropology at the Center for Health Studies and is an associate researcher at the Swiss TPH's Department of Epidemiology and Public Health. She has over 20 years of experience leading projects at the interface of applied research for development and policy implementation. Currently, she heads several research projects in international collaborations focusing on indigenous ethnomedicine and ethnobotany. Yes. Her interests include developing intercultural transdisciplinary research processes applied to socially complex settings, advancing Maya ethnomedical research for culturally pertinent healthcare interventions and policies, pluriepistemic applications of One Health in Latin America, North-South collaborations for advancing new models of UHC, among others. Okay, that was difficult, but we made it. And Pablo Tsukayama, he's assistant professor of microbiology at Cayetano Heredia University, Lima, Peru. He's a Peruvian microbiologist with a long-standing interest in infectious diseases affecting Latin American populations. His research combines approaches in clinical microbiology, genomics, bioinformatics, and infectious disease epidemiology. In 2015, he obtained a PhD in molecular microbiology at Washington University in St. Louis. Later, as a Chevening UK scholar, Pablo obtained an MSc in public health in developing countries at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. In 2017, he returned to Peru to establish his research group at Universidad Peruana Cayetano Heredia, where he is an associate professor in the Department of Cellular and Molecular Sciences. In 2020, he was appointed International Fellow at the Wellcome Sanger Institute in the UK. So we welcome the co-chairs of this session.
Well, good morning, everybody. Pablo and I are very happy to co-chair this beautiful session. So we'll divide the intros. First, we wanted to give you a brief overview. I know that there isn't a single person in this room that wasn't hit by the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. And it taught us one very important thing. The world is one, and we are all connected. So there's no such thing as, it won't affect me. And that has proven to be complex in thinking about how will we prepare for the next one? What does it mean to have pandemic preparedness, response, and recovery? So it's been tough to choose only 3 speakers to cover such a wide array of topics. But one thing that we find very important discussing with Pablo, the focus of this session, was we can't make it just about the technology. We can't make it just about the social sciences and the behavioral components. We can't make it just about genomics. It has to be a bit about everything, and how we scientists are called to engage in interdisciplinary collaborations to address pandemic preparedness and recovery. So if you see this index here, which was already published at the beginning of the pandemic, it was asking us to consider everything that we needed in public health infrastructure, in physical infrastructure, in institutional capacity, economic resources, and public health communications. In many of our countries in Latin America, we finally had vaccines, but then people wouldn't get vaccinated. In my country, we didn't make it past 30% vaccination coverage in a lot of indigenous populations because we simply did not do a good job at translating information that was pertinent culturally for indigenous communities and other communities. So I'm not going to go into details, but just to let you know, the World Health Organization last year launched the Preparedness and Resilience for Emerging Threats, or PRET, action call, or call to action. And they're asking us scientists to help prepare and address the next big threats, because they're coming. And it has three main areas. And funnily enough, it's not about let's put a lot of labs only. If you see, number one is about update preparedness plans that affirm priority actions and that have considered learnings from past events. And yes, so you will hear from our speakers today about what happened in sharing data and in technologies and costs and other issues. The second one is to increase connectivity among stakeholders in pandemic preparedness planning through systematic coordination and cooperation. It seems that this is a no-brainer, but in reality, we'll hear from two of our colleagues today about how tough this can be. We scientists are not necessarily known for our capacity to share our data always. And number three is to dedicate sustained investments, financing, and monitoring of pandemic preparedness with a particular focus on addressing the gaps identified during past pandemics and epidemics. So we'll also get a chance to hear a little bit from one of our speakers about this issue of cost and technology. So just to keep these three things in mind, we wanted to address one last thing for this session. There are two pillars to robust interventions, not only for pandemic preparedness and recovery, but almost for any applied sciences. One is, of course, our job to provide scientifically robust interventions. For these, we need collaborative research networks. And for pandemic in particular, pandemics, maybe you've heard of the One Health approach. This is the approach being proposed to integrate human health research, animal health research, both domestic and wild animals, and environmental research, but also to understand the aspects of food safety and international trade and how these all play together. So all of you, we've heard in the last 2 days, all of you could play a role with your research in giving information that is useful from different disciplines to address the complexity of pandemic preparedness. But there's the other side that we forget in science, which is socially robust interventions. We may have the best vaccines, but if no one takes them, that's not socially robust. So we also have to focus in, co-producing. I get excited. So I think, yeah. Well, so this is my field, so I get all excited. So this is the co-production of transformative knowledge. And we Latin Americans live in intercultural settings, extremely complex settings, emerging democracies, new democracies. And so the transdisciplinary focus is now proposed as the methodological approach for pandemic preparedness. And what it means is we scientists need to work with societal stakeholders to co-produce knowledge that has a buy-in in different stakeholders. And so with these two pillars, we want to just let you know that we chose 3 very amazing scholars. And you'll hear a bit about the coordinated collaboration for pandemic preparedness from Dr. Natalia. You'll hear from Gabriel Carrasco about emerging technologies and from Anderson about genomics and health interventions. But I'm not going to go into details because Pablo is going to introduce all the speakers. So we hope that you can get a bit of this wide complexity from their presentations. Thank you.
Gracias, Mónica. Buenos días. Good morning. Bom dia. As we get into the topic of pandemic preparedness, it is my honor to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Natalia Niño Machado. Dr. Niño is a senior research associate at the Sustainable Development Goals Center for Latin America and the Caribbean, based at the prestigious Universidad de los Andes in Bogotá, Colombia. With a rich background in anthropology and expertise in science and technology studies from the University of Edinburgh, Natalia's career highlights the power of interdisciplinary research. Her work, rooted in the social sciences, explores the complex interplay between data science, AI, and public and global health in Latin American contexts. Dr. Niño's presentation highlights the role of collaborative work in emergency preparedness, underscoring the need for interdisciplinary and intersectoral cooperation. Drawing from her extensive ethnographic work and qualitative research conducted during the COVID-19 pandemic in Colombia, she will explore the challenges and opportunities in data production, sharing, and analysis. Her insights will enrich our discussions, offering lessons on the importance of collaboration in tackling global health emergencies. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Natalia Niño to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Pablo, can I bring you to every event with me? That would be awesome to have such a cheerleader. So should I continue just here? Well, thank you everyone for showing up today. And of course, Monica and Pablo, thank you for the invitation. And it's a pleasure to share this panel as well with Gabriel and Anderson. Today, I will be talking about my research, or the research I've been doing over the last 3 years about COVID-19 response. I am particularly interested in how collaboration takes place in the context of emergency, and how different stakeholders and institutions are able to learn from each other when this is let's say, there's a context of pressure of time, there is a context of uncertainty. So COVID somehow became like a perfect scenario for the kind of research that I do. And all the research about coordination and coordinated collaboration is touch like many aspects of emergency preparedness. But today I just want to talk about sharing data. And I know that's something that we have all talked about in this event. Often data sharing is perceived as a problem from engineering and infrastructure, and often is dismissed, or we don't talk much about the social and cultural aspects that are behind sharing information and sharing data. So that's the presentation I will bring today. I also want to highlight two projects that are like the background of the information that I'm gonna share with you all. One is COLEV that took place between 2020 and 2022. And this is a project that was funded by the IDRC, by the Canadian government. And we wanted to explore the role of artificial intelligence and data science in the response to COVID-19. And the Epiverse TraceLag project is still going on. And it's a project that wants to build, it's a global initiative, but we are building an ecosystem of software and analytical tools to a response of epidemics and pandemics. Both are interdisciplinary projects that are quite big, but in both of them, I'm leading the qualitative component and the ethnographic component. And a lot of what we do is mapping actors and finding who are the stakeholders that are involved in this. Currently, we have been tracking 450 actors that are relevant for Colombia. Many of those actors are not only the members that belong to the governmental agencies, but also communities of users, or communities that are from the civil society, that are interested in thinking about data science, thinking about gender data, thinking about emergency, of course, but that also, stakeholders that are able to connect many others, right? That they are able to do some kind of intersectoral work, or that are bringing together different disciplines. And many of the questions that we do is, who is involved? who should be involved, who is a director or key and strategic actor, what kind of agendas they do mobilize, and who is missing. That question I really love because it's more about what is missing from this map, who is not part of the conversation and eventually will be dismissed or will be underrepresented. This map is public. If any of you want to have a look, please just let me know. So when I began doing the research on COLEF that was about COVID especially, one of the narratives that came very often in the interviews was that COVID became a really good and fertile scenario for collaboration. And that for the first time, many actors were saying that they were collaborating with our institutions, that they had never talked to each other before. And when that became like a normal narrative in the interviews, we decided to begin doing research on why data sharing was so difficult. So if the emergency was bringing this very novel, feeling of, oh, finally I'm meeting our institutions, or finally I have access to information that was in another institution, we began wondering, like, okay, once COVID is gone, we need to keep this scenario fertile. But first, we wanted to understand why data sharing was so hard. Before going there, but I know Monica already gave you an overview of One Health. The reason why this approach is so interesting for me is because it's not only an invitation to think about humans, animal, plants, and their interconnectedness, but also because these kind of approaches can be really hard to put into practice, to set into practice. They're lovely, they look beautiful, they make me happy, but to actually put them in place, that's really hard. And I do believe that maybe in the world of data science, there's a possibility for that concept to be operationalized. Some of the key findings that I will discuss today are these 5. The first one is a lot of the information that we got about the nature of data sets. That's how they were described in the interviews. What do they mean? That the data sets are highly segmented, that they are producing silos. This is something that we have heard a lot in this event. For the case of the health information for Colombia, I also think that the reason why they're also highly segmented is because the health system is highly segmented. So Colombia has a health system that is segmented and fragmented. So data is produced in those silos as well. It's part of the nature of how we produce the data. The data sets are often having a lack of common standards. It's really hard to harmonize, how the data is organized, the variables, even the scale of information is not standardized in many ways. There's also this idea that the know-how of how to navigate data is really hard. It's located in the expertise of very few. So it's not that the institutions are bringing you enough information for you to navigate the data. You have to be an expert in, and I'm not talking about the expertise of the statistician or the epidemiologist. I'm talking the one who knows how to find the link where you can download the data. So I'm not even talking about like how to run a model. I'm talking about if I have to navigate a website, I will spend at least 4 hours because we did this experiment in the project. How long would it take to a new user to reach information about surveillance in Colombia, health surveillance? And it was around 6 or 10 hours and a call to at least 10 friends, right? So when you are in an emergency context, this is serious, right? Because if you only have a very few who know how to navigate data, that human resource will collapse soon. They won't have time to cover something like COVID again. The other one is that data is mainly organized in Excel files. And I know many of you are familiar with that experience. I really like this code. Excel has around 1,048,000 rows. I'm coming from the social sciences, so I never imagined Excel had a limit, but it does. When we were closer to the 1 million cases, this is in Bogota, we all breathed deeply. The Excel file was going to be full. that implied that we had to work with two files, one with 1 million rows and another one with 300,000. And this is serious. And I get what he meant in this interview, because if you are dealing with data and files, you know that when you're running data and models, having two files in Excel is a drama, right? So Excel became just protagonist of the story. You have a lot of lovers of Excel and people who hate it. Especially data scientists were going crazy with the idea that most of the information was going in many files in Excel. So Excel is a technology that's all over the place. In Colombia, not many people is using programming languages or R or Python or anything like that. Excel is like the best friend of the institutions, and they actually perceive it as open source, right? Even when it's not. But it's so public in a way, it is. The other one is infrastructure. And the first one I want to raise is that Colombians, many places in the region and the global south still live in paper. So the digital divide is quite high still, right? And Colombia still have many places where we don't have a current electricity supply or internet access. So paper is important still. Well, many institutions have a lack of storage capacity. So in the COVID-19 period and the first year, many institutions were able to move to data lakes, buying cloud space and all that. But that was new. And well, definitely the lack of infrastructure to make data interoperable. And this picture, I have to say, I love it. It's coming from an ethnographic work. You can find data in these boxes. They are about to die in the mud, and full of animals and insects growing in the boxes. But you can also have data that's organized in an archive very nicely, but still in paper. And if you are lucky, you can also find data in data sets. But what I want to emphasize is that these three kinds of data exist at the same time, right? And that when you are, again, dealing with an emergency, having paper is hard work. We had this experience in which we were hearing about a project that was training an algorithm to do smart pooling to optimize the use of materials in the lab. And they asked for the information of Bogota, and they say, yes, we have the information, it's digital. We'll send it to you so you can train the algorithm. And when they got the information, it was just images of the notification files that were just taking pictures. And for them, that's digital, right? That doesn't mean that it is not digital for their culture, it's organizational culture. That's digital. That's the best they can do. But of course, if you are running data, you're training algorithms, that's not enough. So yeah, they had to hire a lot of people just to make the information digital by hand. The other one is that data is not perceived as a public good, but as a private good. So data is perceived as as owned either by individuals or by organizations, and then don't share it with anybody else. Accessing data can require a lot of lobby and personal connections. So we heard a lot about this. Oh, I have a friend who has a friend who let me have the data set, right? And this is public information from one of the governmental institutions that you should be able to have it as a citizen. This idea of not sharing is also connected with the lack of trust between institutions. And in many ways, I always make this joke that many of those stories look like a Mexican and a Colombian talking about a telenovela. So there's a lot of drama and jealousy and tension, and because they really feel that data is owned and you have put so much work on it that you have an emotional connection to your information and you don't want to share it. But that's, again, for a context like a pandemic, this is difficult, this is hard, this will create a lot of tensions, it won't save time at all. So yeah, we have been doing this, we have been writing now about institutional jealousy and all the emotions that are behind producing and sharing data. And the other one is that actors often anticipated misinterpretation, misuse, or intentional abuse of data. especially from journalists. And I understand why. There's a lot of concern about how they're going to interpret or use the information. They don't want to be involved in a scandal. But also, I have to say that I feel that is also connected with the fact that in Colombia, and I think in many other countries in the region, there is no space for error in science. We're constantly punished by our funders from the government, by even the scientific community and the public when we make mistakes. Making mistakes and errors in science is the normal way of doing things. But when you're working with, in this context, or even with funding from the government, making a mistake that it's not even a mistake, it's part of the production of science, but it's how it's perceived, will bring a lot of tensions to researchers. So many of them explain why they didn't want to share data, that didn't want to. But then when we talk with researchers, we had this kind of perception. Governmental bodies felt threatened. They feel that eventually someone is going to do what they should have done, and then they're going to look bad. I think that there is fear. I feel that they are controlling the information because giving it away takes away their power. So as you can see, sharing data is also about accountability, about transparency, about the tensions between what's public and what's not, but also feeling that you don't trust the government doing their job, right? And countries that have either failing democracies, or where you're not contradicting the government, because we have a history of conflict, because we have a history of missing people in students and researchers. This context is understandable, but it's something that needs to change soon. Human talent, of course, at least for COVID, that is one of I will say the disease that produces the most volume of data in the world in infectious diseases. We also found there is a lack of experience and expertise in the local human talent to actually run data that is, this heavy and this big. And of course, because to understand data like the one you have in COVID, you need interdisciplinary work. That effort of translation between these different fields takes time, and it's really hard. So we often hear things like, oh yes, I have my epidemiological data, but I don't know what the engineer is gonna do with it. I don't want to explain what a prevalence is. There's I don't want to work with our disciplines because it requires a lot of translation. And finally, there are a lot of legal barriers. Institutions are very concerned about not having a clear understanding of what data can be and cannot be anonymized or can be shared as disaggregated data instead of aggregated data. And they're very concerned about making a mistake they will have a legal impact on them. And also that institutions often require a legal agreement to share data between them. And what Colombia did for the response to COVID was to create an emergency decree, like a law that allow institutions temporarily to share the information without having legal consequences. Of course, now that the time has passed, I was like, okay, that was great for some things and terrible for others. Because then you have data sets that, for example, institutions decided just to delete and actually erase, because it's impossible nowadays with the normal legal framework to have that kind of information without being protected enough, completely anonymized, and guaranteeing that you won't find the person that is, like when you're crossing different variables to finally locate that particular person, which again, in a country like this one, that's dangerous, right? Some final considerations. Well, the first one is that data sharing is more than a technical practice. It needs to be understood as a sociocultural phenomena in which human actors and organizational cultures play a key role. Special efforts in building institutional trust are required to facilitate data sharing, and that I don't think that's just a matter of making an agreement between institutions. It's a lot about how those people, how the human talent, those who work there, meet and build trust between them. It's not about leaving the institution, it's about individuals, which is really hard to cover in real practice. Existing networks triggered during the pandemic need special protection so they can continue. What I've noticed is that all those communities that had WhatsApp chats, many of you probably are at least in one of those WhatsApp chats. I think that the government and in general research or funding or agencies should continue supporting those teams, because that kind of collaboration that was built over emergency is very strong, but soon is getting weak. People are moving on, they are doing other research, they are not collaborating anymore. Well, and the final is that One Health, and recently we have been talking about the One Health digital framework. But that framework, I feel, is dismissing all the sociocultural aspect of sharing data. They have like 3 lines saying, yeah, you have to share data. But look at how hard it is to share. It's not about sending a file. And I think that's it. I just wanted to highlight this is my wonderful research group. And of course, nothing of what I just presented, I do it by myself. This is a great group that is working together as an interdisciplinary research team. So please feel free to some questions and get in touch if you are interested in any of this. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Natalia. For our next speaker, it is with great enthusiasm that I introduce my colleague at Cayetano Heredia University, or UPCH, Dr. Gabriel Carrasco Escobar. Gabriel is a rising star in Peru and an expert in innovative technologies for epidemiology and public health. Dr. Carrasco is an assistant professor in epidemiology at the School of Public Health and a researcher at the Instituto de Medicina Tropical Alexander von Humboldt in Lima. He also directs the Health Innovation Laboratory and is a board member at the Center for Research on Health and Climate Change at UPCH. Gabriel obtained a master's in epidemiology from UPCH in Peru and a PhD in public health from the University of California in San Diego. His current work as a joint postdoc fellow at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography and the School of Global Public Policy at UCSC says a lot about his commitment to interdisciplinary work. In his presentation, Gabriel will discuss the transformative potential of novel technologies such as drones, low-cost weather sensors, acoustic data loggers, the Internet of Things, and AI in the surveillance of infectious diseases. His talk will showcase proof-of-concept studies across Latin America and highlight the challenges and opportunities that these technologies present for integration into surveillance and epidemiological analysis. As we explore the role of emerging technologies in pandemic preparedness, Gabriel showcases the critical interplay between technology, environment, and health. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gabriel Carrasco.
Thank you, Pablo, for your very kind introduction words. So let me put this back. So thanks for surviving and up to here. I'm going to show the work of my group in the last couple of years that lies at the intersection between environment and infectious diseases. But it's actually a journey to connect methods and technologies from other fields to bring to epidemiology. And that's why this opportunity or these days was wonderful. So it was great interactions to discuss how to apply Bayesian spatiotemporal models, how we can test the prototype of a drone that can fly and go underwater. It was amazing to know how we can do hydrological models and how we can apply this to infectious diseases or these high throughput technologies for genetics and bioinformatics. So please, if you see something interesting in this talk and you want to test or want to bring some of your novel methods or approaches to the field of public health or infectious diseases, please contact me after this session. So I'm going to start in Lima, and Pablo will confirm. Lima is a culinary paradise, right? We know that a terrific food is there, but this is also Lima nowadays. We are suffering an enormous outbreak of dengue, as many other cities in the region. So up to the 6th week of the year, we have more than 1 million dengue cases in the whole Americas. And this represents, in comparison to the average of the last 5 years, and so 2023 was already an increase based on this historic data, but 2024 represents twofolds the number of cases for the same period in comparison to 2023, and it is threefolds in comparison to the average historic trends of dengue. So we are facing kind of an urgent matter here that requires new approaches, new technologies, how we can expand the toolkit to face these infectious diseases. And it's not only dengue, it's malaria, it's leptospira, it's many other diseases that has a strong links between environment with environmental features. And this is particularly critical in areas or rural areas where people has strong connections with the environment. So this is a rainy day in Iquitos. The people store water in these containers, but you can see that the river is pretty close. The houses are really in close contact to the river, so they can get infected for many diarrheal diseases. But this is the same neighborhood in the dry season, so it changed dramatically. Water container behavior changed dramatically. This is one of our field workers inspecting for dengue in this area. So environment affects directly how the people work, how people live, how people got infected, how people can survive in these areas. So part of this, or part of our work in the group, is to understand the environmental connections, and this is I'm putting here just theory that is very old, how we can manage the control of infectious diseases. So one key topic is environmental management, that is how we can control or to induce changes in the ecosystems to help reduce their receptivity to the propagation of infectious diseases. And this most of the time involves the how we can change the local hydrology or water use practices, right? And this can be done in the land, well, for the landscape composition, the human and wildlife host distribution, and the aquatic habitats. So I'm going to show some few technologies that we can apply in all those contexts, but again, if you find a connection between your field and some of other of this chain of transmission, please let me know. I will be very happy to test them. So going back, just a bit of history, going back, there's a tradition for vector control, but environmental modification for infectious diseases in the last 200 years, right? So from the Panama Canal and the control of mosquitoes to build the infrastructure, Fred Soper, that was called the mosquito killer because his control efforts of mosquito in the north of Brazil. But then in the 50s and the 90s, it was developed the key strategies for vector control for malaria, at least, that is the DDT, or is a chemical for insecticide for indoor residual spraying, and the improved bed nets with insecticide so people can, go and sleep without getting bitten by mosquitoes. But since then, it's almost 40 years or 30 years without any key transformation in the way we control infectious diseases or vector-borne diseases. So that's why we need, or this is a call for new tools for climate-sensitive infectious diseases. And this is a quote from Dr. Steve Lindsay that is applied for malaria, but we can use the same for other diseases. That is, environmental management needs to be considered a central pillar for malaria or other infectious disease control, that all other activities needs to be linked in an integrated fashion informed by accurate ecosystem analysis. And most of you knows that nowadays we have really good technologies from Earth observations. We have drones, we have Internet of Things, we have robotics, we have blockchain. We have many technologies that are emerging that are not included in the pipeline of infectious disease control yet, because we need, better. We need to breach those type of interactions. So starting from Earth observation, maybe this is too old from your field. This is fairly new for epidemiology or infectious diseases. But there was a boom in launches of satellites in the last 20 or 40 years, right? So as well, the spatial, the temporal, and the radiometric resolution of the satellite products increased. We have more diversity in the last 20 or 30 years. And this is a scoping review that we conducted to see what are the satellite products that were used in the literature to inspect infectious diseases. And we were surprised that most of the products that were used for infectious diseases concentrated in 4 satellites that are MODIS, Landsat, SRTM, and TRIM, that are for weather, or for climate, or for land use, land change. But also we were shocked that only 2 infectious diseases, malaria and dengue, are the ones that concentrate 80% of the literature of infectious diseases and remote sensing. So we need to work more on how to use this diversity of products, how we can expand to use in other infectious diseases that are commonly neglected. But this is a call to action as well to, from your fields, try to think how we can apply these new products. And of course, we all know the potential of satellite images. We can see there, we can track the fluctuations of the hydrology that in turn affects the dynamics of infectious diseases. But if you can see here, there's also a very vivid or very dynamic urban transition that occurs in this area. So this is the Amazon of Peru. This is a time period of, I think, 20 years. So the population here increased by 3-fold in 20 years. The hydrology changes, so it creates a perfect formula for new emerging infectious diseases that we need to know how to approach them. As well, remote sensing with satellite images is very important because we can do analysis at a scale. We can do for the whole region, for the whole continent, for the whole globe. However, there are important limitations for small areas. So this is a problem clearly for small islands such as Barbados, Grenada, Santa Lucia, that the size of the pixels or the size of the products is too large for them to really analyze. And this is how 4 villages in Iquitos looks like with this type of satellite images. So it's not a really clear picture what is going on in these tiny villages. And I know that we are looking for really a granular detail, but just for make the example, this is how it looks like with satellite images, and this is how it looks like when we use drones. So with drones, we got information of 1 centimeter per pixel in comparison to the 30 meters per pixel with freely available satellite images, right? So you can imagine the size and the amount of information that we can process that can help to track infectious diseases. So this is how we started to do the proof of concept to use drones to track the epidemiology of malaria in particular, but we applied that for dengue later. But the type of data that we can collect from drones are really high details about habitat suitability of the mosquitoes, deforestation, intermediate host, population distribution, socioeconomic status, hydrological fluctuations, agricultural modifications, and some other applications that really need high resolution data. Some examples, this is a work that we conducted in Malaysia. So in the top, you can see the quick transition in agricultural or land cover. And the difference between the two pictures was, I think, 2 weeks. So yeah, the landscape transformation it could be critical, could be very fast, and could affect as well the transmission of many vector-borne or other type of infectious diseases. As well, in the bottom part, you can see this is thermal images collecting with a drone. But the first one in your left is a monkey that we were able to detect from the boat. But if you look the other one, if you can see on the on the right on the bottom right corner, there are tiny red spots. Those are the same monkeys. Those are the population of the monkeys. And this is particularly important for Malaysia because there's zoonotic malaria in Malaysia. So monkeys can transmit malaria to humans. But this is also important in Latin America because yellow fever is linked to some species of monkeys. But we can see if the proximity of this intermediate host can cause any spillover to human diseases. This is, the last year we received a visit from the Washington Post. So this is an example of what we are collecting with the drone data. So we got really high resolution data that we can get water bodies. We can get information about trash disposal or places where mosquitoes can breed, or we can get information with high resolution about water containers. So these are, well, we are not going to be able to detect this with satellite images with the drone, but with the drones we can really leverage this high resolution information to provide inputs to models to forecast or to make better decisions. The next technology is the acoustic sensors. This is a work that, from my colleague Manu Prakash, that he develops an algorithm that can identify the specific wind beat sound from the mosquitoes. So this algorithm can identify the specific species of the mosquitoes based on the recording of their flights. This was validated in, I think, 20 countries. But he used phones. He used these type of devices, and it is really reliable to do the species differentiation based on the acoustic profile of the mosquitoes. So we took a step forward and we used these audio mods. These audio mods are acoustic sensors where we record like a wide range of the frequency. So the idea here is to detect not only the mosquito wing beat profiles, but also, for example, deforestation sounds, intermediate hosts, anthropogenic use of the forest, or rainfall. And those is not really clear here, but those are the sonographic profiles of some of these equipments. So we can detect, so the sound of a guy cutting the forest is pretty, you can distinguish that very well, right? So we are using this because most of the time, if you ask the population if they go to the forest or if they interact with the forest, they say no. But if you record that people is walking through them, you can see that they are in close contact to the forest range, right? Or if they say, no, we don't cut the forest, but you listen that they are cutting the forest. So yeah, there are some concerns about privacy here. We cannot really identify which person is providing each sound, but it's a good low cost way to get good information that could be applied for infectious disease surveillance. So what we are planning to do, all these technologies needs to be under a framework for data integration, right? Those came from a very diverse settings or the configurations for them to be applied in the surveillance is very complex. But the potential for these under the climate change and infectious disease type of initiatives can help to enhance the environmental use of information. We can help in the decision support analytics. This also helps to build a transdisciplinary community to provide information or inform the decisions for infectious disease control under climate change scenarios. And all of this contributes to the adaptation, mitigation, and surveillance strategy under climate change. So what is the main problem? Data harmonization. So as Natalia was mentioning, this is a mess. This will be always a mess, but we are trying to develop tools that can integrate all of these data sources so we can produce clear information for decision makers. So what is the baseline? We are testing our early warning systems. We developed some forecasting methods to provide information based on environmental data using satellites to multiple countries. This is the example of Brazil, but we did the same with Ecuador, with Venezuela, with Peru. But we can produce information only at the regional level. We want to go down to the village level. So we want to go down to the unit that the local health authorities can really intervene or can really do something. This is another example with the same approach at the administrative unit that is in Vietnam. But this is the only early warning system or forecasting system that is used for decision making, as far as I know. But the idea is to use this. I'm going to skip this. The idea is to use this, all this information combined, and the idea is we can connect the high resolution data with the models that we already have for early warning and response systems to provide this accurate information. So this is the Harmonized project that is funded by Wellcome Trust. This is a network of 4 countries in Colombia, Brazil, Peru, and Dominican Republic that represents 4 hotspots of climate change. The idea is to build a digital infrastructure for all this type of data, for environmental, climate, and health data, but also be flexible enough to include these new data sources, such as the drones or the other sensors. We are testing this in 10 villages in Loreto, that is the Amazon part of Peru. We are doing the environmental surveillance in all these 10 villages using what I was showing before, the satellites, the weather stations, the drones, the surveys, the acoustic sensors, and all the battery of information. Here are some pictures of the fieldwork deployment, but the output is something similar like this. This is a replicate of the village that we can get really granular information about environmental parameters. And those environmental parameters, the aim is that they can inform prediction or forecasting models to see the potential for outbreaks, depending on the rainfall, depending on the deforestation, depending on the different water storage behavior of the population. But the idea is to have a tool that can connect with the Ministry of Health to provide information at least 3 or 4 weeks in advance. This would not be possible without the participation of the Ministry of Health, of the local health authorities. We spend many hours co-designing these interventions with them, because it's really difficult to go to the villages with these new technologies and saying we are going to solve your problem. They are actually requesting us the information that we are collecting. So, for example, the picture on your right is a section of the high-resolution drone map, because this is the local health. This is a local authority. So this is the first time he looks his village from above, and he is using this now for urban planning, or to decide where they are going to put the new house or the new school or something that they want to do. But we in Cayetano, we are also advising them or providing the information that they need. For example, what are the benefits or not to cut the forest to do a specific new project, right? So there's a lot of back and forth, but the key part here is nothing of what I was showing before would not be possible without the interaction with the humans, as Natalia was mentioning. So a few conclusions. We need to reprioritize the environmental management for climate-sensitive infectious diseases. We need to use, test, incorporate these new technologies, especially in these flourishing industries, convene a multidisciplinary community. We really need the co-creation and early adoption of the national control programs. And this is an open discussion because there's a lot of ethical considerations that are still under construction of this technology. So if you have any idea how to approach to them, they are more than welcome. So all this work is based on a huge network of collaborators and institutions across many countries, and especially my team in the Health Innovation Laboratory. So this is my contact information. This is the contact information of the group in case you want to be in contact. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. Super cool work. All right, for the last talk, it is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Anderson Brito, a virologist and bioinformatician based in Sao Paulo, Brazil, whose work has contributed to our understanding of viral pathogens and their impact on global health. Anderson brings over a decade of research experience on viral emergence, viral geographic spread, and its molecular evolution, grounded in impressive training record that includes PhD in computational biology from Imperial College London and a postdoc from Yale University School of Public Health. This is the first time we're meeting in person. Anderson and I met via Twitter during the pandemic. We work in similar fields, and he was in the lab that was at the forefront of developing molecular and genomic surveillance. So it was really cool to see him and see him communicate very complicated topics to the general audience. So it is great to have the opportunity to be here in the same place. So thank you to the organizers for that. Okay. Dr. Brito is now a research scientist at the Instituto Todos pela Saúde in Sao Paulo, Brazil. This ITPS, or the All for Health Institute, is a new private initiative focusing on pandemic preparedness and timely responses to infectious disease threats. Dr. Brito coordinates initiatives that use genomic data analysis for near real-time surveillance of infectious diseases, a critical component in our efforts to anticipate and mitigate the spread of pathogens. Okay. He will explore how genomic and metagenomic sequencing technologies are key in identifying the origin of pathogens, understanding their transmission dynamics, and assessing their potential impact on human health. Welcome, Anderson, and thank you for being with us today.
Is it working? It was. Let me see. Can I use this microphone? Yes. Now it's working. Thank you very much, Pablo, for this very kind introduction. I am Anderson Brito, and as Pablo said, I am a virologist and bioinformatician, but most recently, I have been involved on public health as well. So this presentation will be all about these three main topics, let's say. And where should I put this? Okay, it's not working. So I'll do it from here. Let me try again. It's not working. Okay, so I'll do it from here. So let's get it started. So this is the overview of this presentation. I'll talk about genomic surveillance, how scientific research can be used to solve societal needs. I'll be also talking about disparities in genomic surveillance, and also pandemic preparedness in the context of the work that I am doing right now in Brazil. And I'll close the presentation talking about this interface between science and policy. Oops. Yeah. Is it not working? Great. Thank you very much. So let's get started with an introduction about genomic surveillance. But the best way to start that is to explain about the negative impacts that emerging diseases have on our economy and also our health. On this plot that we have just here, we can have a few examples of outbreaks, epidemics that happened over the past 20 years and that bring lots of economic and health costs to all of us. something around like billions of dollars, as you see here. But I think the best example would be COVID-19, which, as any of these diseases here, is also a zoonotic disease. So the likely origin of the virus are basically animals. So animals get infected with viruses as well, and they tend to be the source of new infections to humans. And the impact of COVID-19 only in 2020 was around $3.6 trillion, which means that definitely investing on pandemic preparedness is worth it, given the amount of costs that a new pandemic may bring to us. So we should definitely invest on that, despite the fact that the emergence of a new COVID, let's say, is very unlikely, but it's definitely worth it investing on that, especially because human action like deforestation and trade has been increasing the risk of a spillover or of a jump of a animal virus into human populations. And this happens especially because viruses have a very high capacity, very high ability to adapt to new hosts eventually, because it mutates a lot. So viruses mutate as fast as they can spread sometimes, as SARS-CoV-2, for example, that I'll give an example soon. How does it happen? Basically, when a virus infects a cell, what it wants to do is to replicate its viral particles, which involves replicating or making copies of its genome. But this is an error-prone event. So errors may happen in this process, and that's how mutations may arise. And with these mutations that accumulate quite quickly, viruses can adapt, but we can also use it to basically track the evolution of the virus almost in near real time. So and this happens because viruses, and here we have like each dot here is a different genome of SARS-CoV-2, the COVID-19 virus. This virus particularly accumulates around 30 mutations per year, or between 2 and 3 mutations per month. That's quite a lot. That's one of the viruses that evolve at fastest rates. And what we have here is basically mutations and time. So this process is quite constant and very rapid as well. But if we do sequencing, if we sequence, let's say, animal samples, human samples, we may not only detect new virus, but we are also able to basically use this genomic information for many things, like to track the spread of a new virus or an existing virus, to understand how the transmissibility is affected by mutations, understand what are the determinants of disease severity, how the virus would eventually escape the immune defenses that we have, or even assess what is the impact of new mutations on diagnostic tests and also medicine. So genomic data has all of these uses. And here I'm going to tell you a very interesting story of a research group where I was based back in 2020. So during the pandemic, when I was doing my postdoc at Yale School of Public Health, where I saw a mosquito-borne virus lab being turned into a COVID-19 lab. Basically, the group of Dr. Grubo is very experienced at the level of diagnostic, RNA extraction, sequencing, and also genome assembly analysis for viruses like dengue, Zika. But this pipeline here is pretty much adaptable to any other virus. So what they decided to do in a matter of a single week was to turn that lab into a COVID-19 lab, involving all the undergrads, master's students, to help understand what was going on in Connecticut, basically. And then what we decided to do was to sequence genomes of variants of SARS-CoV-2 in real time, to basically provide results, data, protocols for decision making. And we did that by creating a website, providing weekly reports, and in these reports we would use very accessible jargon-free language so that decision-making makers and the general public could use it. And one very interesting fact is that we got undergrads and master's students involved in basically maintaining these websites. And if you want to know a little bit more how we managed to go from samples to science communications, we published this paper that basically explains our workflow. And now I'm gonna explain a little bit about disparities which exists across sectors in terms of genomics surveillance, because we only decided to do that because the local health department was not able to use genomics in their daily routine. So we decided to help them. So there are disparities between sectors, but most importantly, there are huge disparities across countries as well. So here we have a huge divide between the global north and the global south in terms of the proportion of COVID-19 cases that were sequenced during the first 2 years of the pandemic. This is a work that I coordinated that shows that, unfortunately, countries in Asia, Africa, and also South America, they were barely able to sequence not even like 0.5% of their cases, where countries in North Europe, for example, they were able to sequence more than 10%, 50% of their cases. But the point is, it's not all about the number of genomes you generate. It's also about how fast, how quick you do that. And here what we show is a comparison between the first year and the second year in terms of the turnaround time, which is the time between sample collection and genome submission. And what we see here is that between the first and the second year of the pandemic, high-income countries and upper-middle-income countries, they were able to speed up the process. But when we see low-middle-income countries and low-income countries, we see that they were not able to do that for many reasons. And another issue is that, as I said, the number of genomes you sequence and how quickly you do that basically determine what is the probability of a country that detecting a new virus or a new variant. And what we found is that if the delay between sampling and submitting a genome is decreased by half, let's say, we could double the probability of detection of a new variant or of a new virus. And now I'm going to introduce you a little bit about the work that I have been doing over the past 3 years when I moved back to Brazil, bringing with me a little bit of this experience that I had related to public health communication, data analysis in near real time. And I do that at Instituto Todos pela Saúde, which is a non-profit organization that basically focuses on helping Brazil get better prepared for the next health emergencies, basically providing financial and also technical help to governments and any other institutions related to public health. And one of the most successful projects that we have there relates to surveillance reports that we do on a weekly basis. And it has a very innovative aspect because we get data from the private sector, like let's say private diagnostic labs, and we integrate such data with public data as well to do data analysis with different data visualizations that can be more accessible to the public. And here we also use accessible language, jargon-free language, so that anyone that can benefit from such information can do so. And one very interesting aspect as well is that we do not stop our work with the reports in our website, because this is just half job done. We have to move forward and also communicate such information. Since our reports, quite often, they are the first ones showing new trends in the increase of number of cases of COVID, influenza, and many other viruses, we are quite often invited to give interviews and to explain what we have found, let's say, last week, like showing what is happening now, basically. And it's something that requires time, requires a little bit of training, and I did that by doing. I never had science communication training. I had to learn that as I was doing, because of course, the words that I would be saying here would hit millions of Brazilians. So I had to do that with extremely care to make sure that I was not misleading the population. And another very interesting aspect of the work that I am doing there is that at the Institute, I don't only do research, I also do work related to capacity building. So one of the projects that we have is helping our local public health department at the city of São Paulo to implement metagenomic sequencing on their daily routine. In this lab, they had this very interesting scenario where they receive more than 50 bats every week from locals, and they have a trained personnel, they have sequencers, but they do not have reagents because likely, let's say, the policymakers, they don't see what's the point about sequencing. So what we are doing is to help them implement that, show what's the value behind it by providing training, reagents, so that they can eventually identify new viruses in these bats, which are in these 11 million people cities. So it's one way how we can help introduce this new technique in the daily routine. And it's a very intersectorial sort of partnership, because we have the mayor of São Paulo, the University of São Paulo, PAHO is also involved, because we want this methodology to be expanded, to be scaled up to other centers in Latin America. So it has been a very interesting project. A very interesting project which has been making me think about how we can make research outputs impact decisions. And since I have been quite involved in this science policy sort of interface, I decided to learn a little bit more and bring to you a few thoughts about that. So based on these two reviews on the topic about science and policy gap, I could understand, for example, that most, if not all, researchers want to do impactful work that make a difference in society. But on the other hand, we have the policymakers who basically want information in a timely, relevant, and credible manner, but quite often they do not have access to it. So here we have the information providers, and here we have those that consume it. And it seems that there's something weird going on here, which is the science policy gap, which is mostly caused by the fact that researchers and policymakers, they quite often don't understand what are the needs of each other. And one of the major reasons for that is communication, because effective communication is definitely fundamental. And one of the barriers for these collaborations to happen is that we researchers, we tend to exchange information only among our peers. Hardly ever we talk to people from outside our fields. So definitely what we need maybe is more incentives for researchers to communicate their scientific outputs with decision makers and also the general public. Also, another issue is that decision makers, as I said, they have poor access to timely research output. They may have access to research outputs, but they are not timely. What does it mean is that maybe what we need is a better are to like create better communication channels to sustain relationships with the policymakers, so that this information can let's say help them in near real time. But the mere access, the mere sharing of data is not enough, because if you share the data, the information in the form of like let's say plots and scientific paper in a foreign language, that will not solve the problem. Maybe what we need to do is to translate this information into formats that are more easy to access. For example, in oral formats, like interviews, meetings, to really explain what the data says. And also, I see that research, academia also has other roles. For example, one of the barriers is that there's this mutual misunderstanding between researchers and policymakers. And one possible solution maybe would be to start these interactions early during the process of knowledge production, not after. Once the paper is done, then we interact. I think maybe we have to revert that. And also we have to find a way to avoid this sort of one-way knowledge production, where we researchers are the ones identifying the problem and proposing solutions at the same time. Maybe what we should do is to work with the end users to somehow define the problems alongside them, and also propose solutions alongside them. And finally, most of these issues may be caused by the fact that researchers, we are mostly assessed based on very classic metrics, which may be inadequate, like number of publications, number of citations, grants. Maybe what we need as a solution is a better system, a system that recognizes the success of a project or of a research based on the degree that it solves societal needs. To finish, I hope that in this presentation, I was able to show that genomic surveillance is a key tool for early detection of new infectious disease threats, that pathogen sequencing has been advancing over the past years in Latin America, but we still have to do some extra efforts to consolidate such methodology in the routine surveillance. That sequencing capacity, as I have shown with that Yale example, can and should be used to solve societal needs, especially during health emergencies, for example. And finally, when research goals match policy aims, then we see good collaboration emerging from it. But to this end, we need to keep a sustained dialogue with policymakers. I guess that's it. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Obrigado.
Gracias. Okay, so we've had some pretty amazing presentations that I think pique our brains in so many ways. And we want to open the discussion to your questions. But first, we thought to ask all three of them the same question. And we wanted to, if we gave you a magic wand right now to each one of you, to do from your point of view in your field, the changes that you need to have your research be relevant for societal responses in pandemic response, what would you do? And the reason we ask this is because sometimes we think, I would like to, but I can't because the policymakers. If you had a magic wand, and this is how we move science forward, what would you like to see as changes in your field to make your research relevant for decision-making in policy? Yes. But you have magic wands.
Definitely one thing that I would love to see happening is genomic data being generated and available in near real time. Because we do see genomic data popping up, but it's usually 1 year after the outbreaks have like finished. That data is relevant, of course, but now it has more of a historic meaning. It cannot elicit actions now. It may help us understand what may happen in the future, but if that data, the same data, was available within like 2 weeks for decision makers to understand, for example, what are the genotypes of dengue that are causing outbreaks in Brazil, in many regions of Brazil right now, and how do they compare with those that circulated last year? In this way, we can somehow understand why are we facing huge outbreaks of dengue now. It may be a different genotype. And if this genotype starts, let's say, is spreading all over the country, we may see similar events happening in other regions due to a genotype that we know that are circulating in Brazil. But the point is, we do not have like fresh data right now. In some regions of Brazil, we barely know what are the serotypes circulating, which is a level that is much broader, and it's relevant as well. But since we do not have data in real time, we can barely do anything with it. Like the data will come 1 year after the event, and then it has a historic importance, but for public health, it decreases its power quite a lot.
Maybe I'll just add one point, since we're on related fields. It would be fantastic to see data generated in real time, but it would be also very nice to see data being shared openly and without that many barriers in real time. And we've seen through the pandemic how we can benefit from coordinated data sharing and analysis. So maybe, hopefully, that will be around for the next one.
Well, yeah, my first thought was data sharing, but I'm sure Natalia will touch that. But for public health, I think one of the most important technologies is clean and safe water. And to solve that, we don't need epidemiologists. We need people from other fields. We need to build some interactions there. So this brings me to the point, in particular for Peru, we have a crisis of confidence, interpersonal confidence and trust, and inter-institutions confidence and trust. So in Peru is critical, but in the region is important as well. So we, as this naive or civil community, doesn't trust in their governments. Between institutions inside governments, they don't trust each other. And we have all the problems with the data that Natalia was telling. We have all the problems with capacity building that he was talking about. But how we solve this, how we build confidence to face the next pandemic, will be critical, because we have these phenomena of misinformation or misuse of the information. It's a more complex phenomenon that it's from the society, but touch us as researchers, that we are not really we are not on board of how to deal with this.
Yeah, that's a hard question. Yeah, well, if it's not my field, but I agree with you both about the data sharing, making it open. And I think that the next question for that is open to who and from where. Because we talk a lot about open science, but then an open data, and then you see it all in English, right? And in Colombia, one of the things that we're facing is that most of the trained human capital that can deal with that data, they don't speak English. So there's a question of how to decolonize knowledge production in Latin America as well. But if you ask me about the field of social sciences, I would love to have spaces for social sciences in this field. We are very few who have managed to navigate going into being the strangest one, no? The bicho raro, the one that no one's understand, or they see social sciences as the problem, like, oh, you're the hot potato nobody wants because they are raising the questions that get hard to deal with. So spaces for social sciences will be fantastic. But I think that the other thing that I would love to see is problem solving from interdisciplinary points of view. We know that arbovirus, for example, have so many shared issues, right? Like water and water supply and, you know, infrastructure. But also they also share backgrounds in science that maybe will be interesting to put together. So that will be like my ideal world, Monica.
All right, so those are great answers. And to add my two grains of salt to that, I would love to see transdisciplinary research be taught in our universities. Undergraduate students should, I think, have these pi personalities, the mathematical number, one foot in their discipline, but able to have conversations with the other disciplines and then go beyond academic discourse to societal stakeholders and have these complex, the ability to navigate complexity in social context. But anyway, we would like to hear your questions, please. ¿Los van a pasar ustedes? 1, 2, 3, sí.
Hi, thank you very much for the talks. Very interesting, all of three. I was wondering, now that the COVID pandemic is behind, like what have we learned? Like in terms of, like, we know that so many countries applied totally different strategies in terms of, for example, education, lockdowns, all these. Like, do you have any idea of, if it would happen? I know that each virus and each society is totally different, but if it would happen again, like what could be, what have we learned in terms of what do we need to do? I mean, this is a huge experiment that happened in the whole world for 2 years. So I guess if we got, like, we are talking about data and how to use this data. So what do we learn from all these data? Thank you.
I think there's several, but I guess that one is that it's possible to do collaboration, right? That's doable, that implies changing a lot of the way your organizational culture works. But I think we learned that it's possible to find communities that are willing to collaborate, to talk to each other, to share information. The other one I will say is that, at least I'm talking about mainly Colombia, I don't know if it's the same in the region, but improving the information systems is necessary. Like we didn't, for Colombia at least, when we had to prioritize vaccination, and the national government would say, go first with, like the group of 70 to 80 or teachers. And then you go to municipalities, they didn't know what those people were, right? That even the same to do profiling of people who were at risk, at higher risk. The EPS, which is like the health provider in Colombia, they didn't know very well where their patients were. So for me, making more robust the information system and making it interoperable is mandatory for the next emergency. The other one is about training people. And then training, I'm not talking just about dealing with data, but also health services. The workforce that was involved in attending the response. It's not part of the topic of this panel, but there's what we know about what's happening with them in terms of mental health, and what is happening to them in terms of what happened with their careers, the gender imbalance that was connected to providing the services for the patients. That cannot happen again. So I think there's another question for people working in logistics. They have a huge field to explore. So hospitals can have a real supply. COVID, I don't blame it because we didn't know much about how to deal with it. But now that we have that experience, I think it's time to sit down. I think that's something that we just began doing, just to have the time to go back and say, okay, what should stay, and what was a mistake. But I think that the community is in the process, but I think people is so fed up from COVID that they just don't want to have the conversation anymore. But it's time to do it, and it's time to, like, to put together all that knowledge and that expertise. In Colombia, I have to say that that's missing because the government changed, and many of the officers and the technicians that were involved in the pandemic are not working anymore there. So it's hard to collect all that knowledge. But I think that's something that should be done.
Yeah. In my opinion, there are many things, but the first one is we learn what is epidemiology, right? Before that, nobody knows that. The second one is, I agree with the surveillance systems. We know that we need surveillance. We know that we need data. But then, and there are many things from the pandemic, but I think the most important thing is the political will to do things. Why? The numbers that I was showing about dengue. So in Peru, we have 181 deaths of dengue in these first 6 weeks of 2024. This is equivalent of the third, fourth, or fifth month inside the pandemic, in the COVID pandemic, when we have everybody, concerned, we have everybody informed, we know that we need to connect many institutions. But why dying from dengue is less important than dying from COVID? So public health is important. Our research is important. How we communicate with the politicians, how we communicate with the decision makers is probably the most important thing. So we need to have the evidence ready to have this conversation. But we don't receive, as Anderson was saying, we don't receive training to be part of those conversations. The other part is we need a facilitator. Probably we researchers are not going to be capable to do all of this, but we need a person to be in the midpoint to connect us with the politicians, to translate what we are doing. We need probably from social scientists or a person that can facilitate that conversation. But again, is the problems are here. Climate change is here. We have many concerns that we can apply things that we learned from the pandemic, but it's just not political will because it's not attractive now. Probably this year are elections in most of the countries, right? But probably now it's going to be again, promises of doing things for whatever. But just to mention in Peru, the last year, from all the options for district candidates, there were no plans for climate mitigation or adaptation in any of the districts in Peru, in the plans for the people that were applicants. So again, it's just what is sexy at that moment, and we need to think. We need to push our research to be sexy or to be attractive, or we need to facilitate or get in contact with people that can facilitate that conversation.
Wearing my hat of science communicator, what I wish we have learned is that we have to invest on basic education, because it was extremely hard for me, for example, to explain on live TV very advanced aspects of virus evolution if the population barely know what is a virus. And I was explaining how to protect yourself from a respiratory virus, but maybe the person doesn't know that it's not by touching that the virus will get through your skin and infect you, because it's a respiratory virus. So I was in many moments having to spend hours of my day to fight against that new fake news about something completely crazy but that was spreading faster than the actual virus. And that it stems to lack of basic education in many senses. For example, I would hate to be in the same position as those that are now communicating about climate change. It must be very difficult, because it's a phenomenon that shows its impacts over decades, hundreds of years maybe, but it's affecting us now because it has been changing since decades and hundreds of years ago, centuries. I was trying to explain a phenomenon that was happening now. Like the neighbor was dying of COVID. The person was able to hear the person coughing, but at the same time, the person was saying the virus doesn't exist. How can I fight that? It's extremely difficult. So definitely what we should do is to invest on education, I guess.
One that is coming and hearing what you just mentioned is misinformation. It's gonna be key, especially with ChatGPT going on and the fact that you can create. We were talking about this recently, about the fact that you can create fake news so easily now. I think with COVID we saw it, but I don't imagine COVID with ChatGPT going on in 2020. So yeah, that one I don't work on that, but I think that's going to be hard work.
Anyone, there was another question. While you get the microphone, let's not forget the concept of syndemics. Pandemic didn't hit us all the same. So we learn that there's a differentiated impact in excluded poor communities. And we call that this synergistic effect of pre-existing conditions of exclusion. And then a pandemic hits and we have a syndemic effect where the rural poor became poorer because of the pandemic, more deaths. And so we now know that we have differentiated approaches to design in different areas of the world because we created more exclusion after the pandemic. Please.
Yes, thank you for your presentations. Were all very interesting. My question relates to time. I think it's a critical variable in all the work you do. On one hand, your work is about providing timely information to anticipate, to prepare for problems. I mean, most of us work on deal with crisis. And on the other hand, you are researchers. You are scientists, and we all want to understand and explain and predict our systems or problems in depth. So taking into account what you just show and the time and effort that it takes to produce, to share, to communicate information, there is a clear trade-off between timeliness and completeness. So how you deal with that trade-off?
One thing that I noticed from experience in that Yale group was that we can reconcile these two needs. We have this need to publish papers, of course, because that's unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, that's how our success is measured. We may have to change that, but anyway. On the other hand, we also want to communicate what we are finding, which is not complete, but in like amid the darkness, it's a small light that may help. What I learned there is that we can do both. Like we were generating genomic information, we have this pipeline that could analyze it quickly and provide very valuable insights now. Then we would publish reports in a very open way. Like even, let's say, our hypothesis would be already there, kind of open to anyone, but it doesn't matter. Because in parallel, we were gathering that data. And then let's say, I remember of this paper that we wrote that was extremely impactful. It was about the introduction of the alpha variant in the US. We started that work in November, and then we started sequencing genomes every week. And then in January, we had lots of genomes, but those information, like that information was already open. Anyone knew that alpha variant was in the US, like basically everywhere. And by January, we had a preprint. And by March, we had that published in Cell. So I haven't identified any disconnect between doing both, because we were doing that in parallel in some way. But of course, it depends on trained personnel. As I have shown, we had an army of researchers, like undergrads, master's students, grad students, postdocs. In that way, it's easier. But imagine, and I got your point. Imagine an average Latin American lab. It must have one researcher, one postdoc, a PhD. It's only 3 people. It's not possible to do like that in scale, but at least a few hints, a few like insights, it could be possible. But yeah, definitely in that situation with limited resources, then it becomes something that can be an obstacle. Definitely.
I really like that question, because definitely the time of the epidemiological time and temporality is different from the policy making timing, right? Like when you're talking with a mayor in a municipality or a ministry, they need the information for tomorrow, right? And so sometimes they will say things like, "Oh, but just give me the number. I don't. Maybe you got that," and you're like, "No, I need 4 days to run the model, or 2 days, right? Like that's 24/7, but it won't be as fast as they wanted, for example." So yeah, they are like going in a different trajectory in many ways. Um, on the other hand, the idea that I think this is a call for universities and research groups, that in the sense that we cannot continue being measured just by publications when we're facing an epidemic and a crisis. I don't know if you heard that many tenure tracks were in danger because researchers were working in other things related to COVID, and then they didn't produce what they needed to produce to have their tenure going on. So many universities gave researchers and lecturers 1 year more to catch up with their with their goals. So the whole infrastructure of how academic work, if they want to collaborate with the public sector or in attending risk crisis, we need to readjust those terms, because there are not incentives for academics to continue collaborating. I have lots of research interviews with researchers that decided in the second year just to stop collaborating, because they were exhausted, because they were working 24/7, and also because they had their jobs in danger because they were not producing the papers that they needed to produce. So that one is hard. But that's also true that COVID is special, but for other outbreaks, normally if you work in that, is because you have been working on that for many years. Like for example, in people who were doing modeling for COVID, they had developed modeling for dengue or for Chagas or malaria, so they have some expertise already. It's like the vaccine sample. It's not that they just came up with a vaccine in a year. There's a lot of there's an enterprise in science that is behind. But definitely that's a hot topic, and the fact that evidence can change really fast, but then policymakers are already made decisions. So
Let me just add one point that you make me remember. Of course, if we want researchers to do that, they need to be funded, because they need people working on that. So when we were talking about partnerships between researchers and policymakers, maybe the policymakers must see us as those that are willing to help. So we need to strengthen such interaction, and really show, look, we can help, but we need funds to hire people, to have an army of researchers to do what you want, and then we'll publish and also provide valuable information. So it's not magic, like it requires funding as well.
I think we're beyond schedule already. We can take one. We can take one more question. Okay, maybe two.
I just want to say all the conversations, all the presentations were amazing. I really appreciate the first one about that amazing X-ray you gave of some of the problems and the disconnections between the social part. I was involved a little bit in the beginnings of the COVID-19 response in Panama, and exactly those problems that you presented, we suffered the scare when the Excel sheet was running out of space. Many of those things are so real. And Panama had the opportunity to, we were lucky. We had a public agency that was agile, was young, trying to create technology to bring information to population. And one of the biggest obstacles they had was to connect with the old school paper-based work that was done in the Ministry of Health, to the point where a lot of these tools that they developed are dying, because basically now that we're in theory not in the pandemic anymore, they're not using them anymore. And it was really hard for the nurses and the medical personnel to really adopt those technologies that were brought in. But I just wanted to mention two things that, if it's possible to hear at least one of your opinions, two topics that I think would probably add to all the amazing topics that you've covered. And one of them is, I think it was briefly mentioned, somebody recommended, how important it is education for the problem of explaining some of these complex topics. And I think you mentioned that it's a problem of misinformation, right? And that's a reality. I've had, professional friends, well-trained in the United States or other countries, that believe some of these misinformation campaigns because they're designed to do that. So how can we really address those issues? And then the other one is, if we want to do surveillance, if we want to do diagnostics, if we want to do all these technologies, one of the major problems we had during the pandemic was access to supplies and medical devices. There was a global shortage. And I think that countries like Panama, maybe Brazil, and bigger countries in Latin America are a little bit different, but we are used to importing all of our technologies. So how can we promote local manufacturing of some of these things that we know are important to be better prepared for the next pandemic?
Yeah, I think there's one is soberanía tecnológica. I don't know how to say that in English. Sovereignty, technological sovereignty, probably. Yeah, that's a hot topic going on, because clearly all the countries had agreements for, if something happens, eventually we'll work together. And then as soon as we needed supply and as soon as we needed vaccines, the stronger ones just kept it for themselves, right? So yeah, the countries in the region really struggle with finding gloves and simple things. Yeah, not my topic, so I'm gonna stay away from it. And misinformation, I really don't know. I think that's something we haven't solved. Because especially in this post-truth era, right? Like all these debates of what fake news are or which are not, and all the identity politics that are behind that as well. It's hard to navigate that field. Kolev, the first project that I show you, had a museum of the missing collecting the cliff. Yeah, but how to do it in practice, I really don't know. I think that normally you need someone who really represents that you trust, that the public can trust, and that can be that intermediary, because sometimes even presidents of the nation, people wouldn't believe them because they don't trust what they say. And so in some countries, I was glad they didn't believe them, right? But I don't have an answer. I don't know if maybe Anders or Gabriela have.
Well, I just want to touch lightly on the misinformation part, because it was very harmful that at some points they put at the same level a guy that produced misinformation and a researcher, and they put them to debate, to just exchange it. And that's not a way to solve or move forward. This was more harmful when in some institutions they promote this openness to diversity of opinions. Right, that's good within the scope of topics that are within the same criteria to produce. It's not just you believe or just you invent something. It's something that needs to be solid in terms of how the evidence was produced. So that's the first part. But the second part is that during COVID, there was a lot of epidemiologists that we became in not famous, but in social media, a lot of people follow us and start asking questions. And it show up two major problems. The first one is the communication of the institutions, because you don't need a person to communicate something that the Ministry of Health needs to communicate, or the Bureau of Statistics needs to communicate. But the second one is even if they do the correct work in communicating, you need someone that you can trust or be more approachable. So an institution is not someone that you can easily trust, right? But at the same time, there was a phenomenon, I don't know, because Pablo is a rock star as well in the social media, but and Anderson as well. It was like a burnout in the social media, right? Because people got exhausted to explain the same thing again and again and again. And you need to do your work, and you need to think on your publications, and you need to think that you don't have a stable place to work, right? So, and you have family, or you plan to have family. So, and for women, it was a clear gap there, because a lot of women could not afford those type of pressures or exchange, because they need to be in charge of many other things that it's not correct, but it's just how it happened, right? So, yeah, it's much more complex than a conversation of how we deal with misinformation. Is more structural in terms of our institutions, but in terms of how we do science, as you were saying.
I would just like to discuss a little bit about the last point about the level of dependence that we have from resources that are produced outside our countries. I've mentioned briefly about timeliness, and that research that I did was quite interesting, because that involved research, like the top researchers of all continents. And it was super clear to hear from folks from Latin America and like Africa, Asia, that one top obstacle was access to reagents that they would have to buy like from foreign countries, and it would take more than a month to arrive. And of course, once they run out of reagents, then there's no timely work anymore. There's no work. It's not possible to do anything. So we are really dependent, and I don't have an answer on how we can fix that, but definitely our governments should look at this as a strategical need. Like we need to be able to produce at least the basics locally, because if we need to import like everything, it's gonna be difficult next time.
Okay, thank you so much to the co-chairs and the speakers. I think this was very interesting, and it seems like everybody wanted to just keep talking. Now we will have the opportunity to talk outside. We're gonna have a 10 minutes break, and please come back at 11:10 to start the other session on time and have lunch on time.
Explora más contenidos de tu interés. No olvides suscribirte a nuestro canal.